And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another victorious and exciting episode of Doing the Work, the first show on the Back Home Network covering IU women's basketball. I'm your host, Jeff Marlow, and I'm joined by my co-host, Kathy Amos, and our special guest, Amanda Foster from Crimson Cast today. Today, we're discussing today's overtime win against Nebraska by your number 4 and 3 ranked Indiana Hoosiers, 74-62, as they outscored Nebraska 12-0 in the overtime. Yes, you heard me right, 12-0 in the overtime. Just wish we'd done that a little earlier. This takes the women's record to 13-1 overall and 3-1 in the Big Ten. But let's start this show the way we start every show, and that's with our banner moment. And my banner moment today is going to go back to Sydney Parrish in the overtime with 3:55 to go in the overtime. She buried a three to give Indiana a 3-point lead, and then a couple possessions later, while still holding a 3-point lead, Sydney Parrish hit Chloe Moore McNeil on a sweet back cut, off a back screen on a cut to the basket that Chloe scored to give Indiana a 5-point lead. And those two plays are really my banner moment, as that really kind of set the tone for the overtime. And our banner moment is sponsored by Home Field Apparel. Home Field is constantly releasing new schools or updating their products for schools in their existing line. You're bound to find something for you or anyone in your life that loves great collegiate gear. So whether you want only IU gear or any other college teams or nothing associated with the team, Home Field probably has something for you. Go to homefieldapparel.com and use our promo code HOME, HOME, to get 15% off your entire first order. That's promo code HOME for 15% off. And once again, the website is homefieldapparel.com. Wear one for the team. And so we're going to send it over to Kathy for the Amos angle and get her initial thoughts about the game or anything else that may be on her mind.
Yeah. Hey, Happy New Year, everyone out there listening live or that listen to this later. And a special thanks to Amanda for joining us here today as well to kick off the new year. So yeah, everyone, I mean, I was hoping for maybe a little bit more of a low key after a New Year's Eve last night and getting off the year started here, but they gave us an exciting game. And, you know, it wasn't maybe the prettiest game we've seen. And we definitely are still feeling the absence of Grace Berger, but they pulled it out, and the win is a win. They defended home court and they really came alive in overtime. And I'm sure we'll talk about their defense throughout the game, but their defense, I think, in overtime just was amazing. They didn't allow Nebraska to score at all. So I think, to me, that's what really came together. So, and if that's what we're going to need to do, they did it at the right time. And for me, I think that was the takeaway for me today, Jeff.
So let's send it over to Amanda for Amanda's take about the game or anything else that may be on her mind.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me again. It's been a while since I've been able to come on, but of course, always happy to talk about Indiana basketball. And I mean, Kathy, you talked about it, just the defense, especially in overtime. It was like a whole new team kind of showed up, and that was the team that everybody was wondering for the first 40 minutes, where are they? What are they doing? And the fact that they were able to come out and perform like that in overtime and not allow any points from Nebraska says a lot about them. The way the entire game was played, I think, says a lot about Big Ten basketball and what we can expect going forward. Is that none of these games are going to be easy, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later, but you never know what's going to happen no matter who you play. And I also just wanted to touch on Jaz Shelley only scored 5 points today, and she's averaging almost, I think it's like 17, but like up there close to 20. And so that's another testament to how Indiana was able to play against her the entire game to only keep her to 5 points.
Yeah, and let's kind of build off of what Amanda talked about a little bit, because I think, Kathy, you and I in our group chat a little bit, we're talking about this as well. Just seemed like Amanda brought up the defense and how Shelley only had 5, but one of the things I think everybody, including Amanda, as she mentioned, was we didn't feel like the defense was as solid as it normally is today, at least until the overtime. So, Kathy, I was throwing that to you. What did you think?
Oh, sorry. Yes, I agree. Yeah, I think, outside of the overtime, we've, in our group chat, we have, Jeff, between you and I and Ari, we talked about the D kind of just not being there today. They seemed a step slow coming out, especially in that first quarter. And, maybe they also had some New Year's Eve plans and not quite awake and ready to go. But yeah, and that really translated into their defense. But, if we're going to, again, they hung in there, and that's really all we sometimes need to do. But Amanda, I think you had a great point. They just have to continue grinding out, and remember, the Big Ten is never going to give you a gimme game. We knew Nebraska was going to be tough coming in, even at home. So hopefully these last couple of games is a great reminder for the team that they have to put their best foot on that floor every time they play, regardless of who they're playing or where they're playing.
Yeah, and Amanda, I think one of the things, if you're an Indiana fan watching this today or listening to us on the podcast, is this was a game where we trailed for the biggest chunk of it. Mm-hmm. And so for the players to be able to dig in and at least find a way to get it to overtime, I thought that spoke volumes about where their mindset was.
Oh, 100%. And you talked about Sydney Parrish, and I wanted to touch on Yarden Garzone because I was watching with my family. So my dad was downstairs, and he said that Terry Moore must have said something to Yarden going into overtime, because the way that she was playing, there was so much more aggressiveness, and her steals and the way she was able to force the turnovers and just make a lot more of an impact in the overtime is what you need from her and from everybody else on the defense for the entire game. But I think she did a really good job of adjusting and coming into the overtime and making a big impact.
And we talked a little bit about this, Amanda, Kathy and I did after the Michigan State loss on Thursday. Just somebody show some fire. I felt that was one of the things that was lacking on Thursday. Well, at least in the overtime, finally, Yarden showed some fire. She looked like she was excited. Mm-hmm. She was fired. And I thought that kind of really, again, I thought Sydney did, had Harry made her a couple of plays before Yarden got going as well. But at least somebody was willing to try and bring some energy and bring some fight to that overtime. And I felt that carried over to the others. Kathy, what did you think about that?
Yeah, I did too. I think Yarden really showed a lot of emotion, and we haven't seen that out of her, not just this game, but just in general. She's usually a very cool, calm, collected player. And boy, she really got fired up after, I think it was a defensive play there. And I thought it permeated throughout the whole team. I think Sydney as well, we could talk about her as well, coming in that overtime and kind of playing a little bit more with the fire going with them. And I think between Sydney and Garzone in particular in that overtime, both of their enthusiasm and excitement and fire finally showed up, and it permeated throughout the rest of the team, and it showed up in the scoreboard there in overtime.
All right, so let's go on and let's talk a little bit about what went as expected. Amanda, we're going to throw it to you first. As you watch, and again, there probably wasn't a lot that went as expected. Yeah. Is there anything you want to pick out?
I mean, I think it would be silly to not talk about Mackenzie Holmes, because that you watch, you're like, okay, she's going to hit 20 something points today. I was not surprised in the way that she performed, because that's just who she is and that's how she plays. And we all know that. And they talked about that on the broadcast of just consistently being so consistent and so efficient with the ball and always averaging double figures in whatever season she's playing in. And so in a game where very few things went as expected and maybe as they should have, Mackenzie Holmes did everything that she was expected to do. And you could even say a little bit more, especially, looking back to Michigan State, she definitely did more than people would expect. 32 points is a career high is insane. But so that's kind of become the expectation for her, I guess, if you will. And so she was the consistent player for Indiana today, which is not really a surprise for anybody at this point.
And Kathy, what about for you?
Yeah, I had the same thing, Amanda, written down. Mac doing Mac things, I think, is exactly what I have on my paper here when I was taking notes. I think, we've talked about the defense not being maybe great, especially in that first quarter. I do think it picked up some in that second quarter. So you can see that they were really focusing on it. And to me, that is something we would expect. Maybe it didn't stay consistent throughout the game like we would like to see it, but it did pick up in that second quarter in particular. And I thought it really picked up, obviously, as we've talked about in overtime. So to me, I think the defense started to get a little better and was showing us glimmers of, that it hasn't completely disappeared on this team, which to me is definitely something as expected.
Yeah, and I was going to go with that one as well. So it's interesting how all three of us are helping lead it into the other, is because when you look at the second quarter and the overtime, that's 15 minutes. We gave up 8 points. And so that's kind of the defense you've come to expect from a Terry Moore and team. But then you had, the first quarter, we gave up 22, we gave up 18 in the third. So that's kind of like, well, that's not usual. So it was nice to see the defense get locked in. With that, I will say this, watching the game, I just feel like at times we're getting caught over helping. And that part of that may be because we're at times not guarding the ball handler very well. but there were just too many times where a lot of their threes I felt like came because we overhelped and then couldn't get back on the closeout and just made it easier for them. I'm not saying easy, but easier. So that was one of the things I took away. And I got a feeling I got a feeling that's on their film, and they're going to have to figure out, and I'm sure they're working on it, but that has not been typical of the teams over the last 2, 3, 4 years where they really get caught so much overhelping. But I did think that was part of the issue there. Amanda, anything else that you thought kind of went as expected on a day where maybe there wasn't much, as I said earlier?
Yeah, I think one thing that I was just looking at the stats and the way that, and I've talked about this when I've done my own podcast and writing about them and everything, but the way that they just don't give up and the tenacity that they have, and especially Sydney Parrish, she kept shooting those 3-pointers and they kept bouncing off and she kept missing, but she didn't stop. And really, that I think is also a testament to the way that the team is structured and kind of the mentality, going back to the kind of same thing of only allowing 8 points, is just not giving up and keep pushing through. And we saw how that worked out for her at the end of the game and in overtime. And so that has become something that is not really that surprising to see them just keep trying to work through their issues that they're having on the court and in the game.
Kathy, anything else for you?
No, but I had the same thing as well, that, the stick-to-itiveness and McKenzie, and then, their defense, especially in the second quarter and overtime. Those are my 3 things that I had.
Well, I will also point out here, she didn't put up huge numbers offensively, but she was not committing turnovers. And that was Sarah Scalia today. Sarah Scalia went the full game with, she played 33 minutes, didn't have a turnover. Now she didn't have an assist. But she did have a steal. So, kind of a little bit minimal bounce back game for Sarah. And she had 6 points. So I thought Sarah started to show maybe that she was at least finding her footing a little bit. So, and
5 rebounds, Jeff, too. I thought those rebounds were important.
Yeah. And that was where I was going to get to as well. I skipped over that. Thank you, Kathy. And from the standpoint that she just, sometimes when you're struggling, she played a little bit as we expected today. That's why I'm throwing her in here, but you got to find your footing a little bit. And I thought she did that today. Yeah. So we'll move on. So, all right. Well, what about surprises? Kathy, we'll throw it to you. Anything? Well, your first surprise of the day?
The first surprise. Yeah. I think we talked about this a little bit, and I was actually surprised to see them have a slow start in that first quarter. I really expected, especially coming off of this Michigan State loss, that they would maybe hopefully refocus and come out and really play with some tenacity from the first tip. And they just looked a step slow. They looked slow on offense. They looked slow on defense. And, it really, kind of put them behind the 8 ball there with losing that first quarter 22-19. And to me, this is kind of a surprise. I think that they weren't quite as, energetic. We haven't seen that a lot from Coach Morin and her teams. And so I was a little surprised at that, Jeff and Amanda.
Amanda, how about you?
Yeah, I have to agree with that one. Definitely. I think all of us were a little taken aback, and similarly, just, it seemed like at times the communication was not there in the ways that we've seen it before, and they did a few times with the way that the ball handling and the passing can be so smooth sometimes, but then in a lot of times today, it seemed like it just wasn't quite clicking, which you, at this point in the season, and having time off and coming off of a game where against Michigan State you weren't that successful, you would think that would be something that they would have worked very hard to improve upon from the get-go, and that didn't seem like it was a very consistent thing. And I was also kind of surprised with the way that up until overtime, I guess in the last few minutes, the way that Yarden Garzone played, just not with a lot of, I don't want to say effort, because obviously you put in a lot of effort, but it didn't look like there was a lot of that fire and a lot of that push that we've seen from her in the past, and we know that she has. It just seemed like it wasn't all there today until we got to overtime.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I will say this, kind of both of you kind of led to where I was in terms of the surprising, but that also was that we really struggled at times with rebounding, and again, I think that's part of it. That some of these games that we're at least until we can get some of our injured people back, we're going to really have to rely on a committee rebounding, but they were out rebounding us for most of the game and we ended up tied. So that to me was, that was a big thing that came out of there. I'm going to go also here as well. The other surprise, I liked it when we brought Lexi Bargesser into the game and we went a little smaller, and I'm going to talk about Lexi a little bit more later, but I'll throw that in here as a surprise just because we haven't seen Lexi play this many minutes especially against a quality opponent. So that was my kind of second surprise. And Kathy, we'll go back around the horn with you as well.
Yeah, Jeff, that actually leads into my second surprise, not just Vargasser, but in general. I thought at the beginning anyway of the game that we went to our bench really early. We also had Sandvik got into the game today. We've had Alyssa Geary gave us 4 minutes, and Lily Meister actually came in and contributed some. Now, she only had 2 minutes, but still, I thought that it was surprising to me. Again, things we've been hoping for, I guess, at least Jeff and I on our other shows that we've had, hoping to see more of the bench. And today, at least early on. Now, I didn't expect it in a tight game in that second half, and certainly not in overtime. You saw we went back to our starters in overtime. I believe they all 5 played the entire time in overtime. But yes, the bench in general was just a nice surprise, especially Vargasser. So it was great to see her really contribute great minutes. And again, if people just simply didn't see the game and look at the box score, they might not see it from Vargasser. And I think, to me, she had just a really nice game, even though you might look at her stat line and go, well, she only had 4 points. Well, it's not always about scoring, right? So, and people miss that when you aren't able to see the game. So to me, just in general, to wrap up, yes, the surprise to me was that we had great bench play, especially from Vargasser, and early on into the game, we were getting some players in there that we haven't really seen.
Amanda?
That was actually exactly what I was going to talk about too, with Lexus and the way that the bench played and the way they were able to all contribute and really do good things. And like you said, that don't show up on the stat sheet. So,
Amanda, anything else you want to throw in here?
Oh, I don't think so. I think we've pretty much we've covered just about everything.
I got one, and I'm going to throw it in this segment just because, to me, it was a little bit of a surprise that they talked about it as openly as they did on the broadcast. Grace, it was reported today, for those who didn't watch the game today and are listening to us or watching us on YouTube afterwards, or were listening to the podcast afterwards, it was reported on the podcast today that Grace Berger was without crutches and without a brace. And they seemed kind of surprised, and you guys can disagree with me if I'm wrong, if you took it a different way. But the way I took it, they talked like they were kind of surprised they did not see her in uniform today. And so I think that gives us some real hope that we're going to see Grace Berger back much sooner rather than later. I'm not going to predict next week, but boy, they sure made it sound like she's going to be back, maybe by next time we play against Northwestern. What did you think, Amanda?
Yeah, I saw on Twitter, I think it was against Michigan State, someone put out there that she wasn't in crutches or in a brace anymore. So that part was not surprising, but I was surprised with the way that they talked about her timetable returning, because at least from my perspective as like a media person, we hadn't been told any sort of like 4 to 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, whatever. And then they just came out and said 4 to 6 weeks and 6 weeks is next week. I was like, okay, but if you say so, I don't really know. And I think part of me in the back of my mind was thinking not when it first happened, but in the next few weeks, like maybe we'll get her back in the beginning of January. Who knows? I wasn't thinking it was going to be today. And I don't really think it's going to be next week, but I think it's going to be something where we don't know what's happening until she gets out there. And then everyone's like, okay, great, she's playing again. But I wouldn't be surprised if it is relatively soon, if I'm going to be honest.
Yeah.
Kathy?
I guess I just I don't know how much inside knowledge the ESPN commentators have. So I'm taking everything they said and, I'm going to just discount it. And if they're right, then wonderful. And in my brain, I've been always just planning on Grace being out through January. And if we get her back sooner, then I'll just be ecstatic along with the rest of Hoosier Nation. Right. So I'm just going to ignore them, although they did go to practice yesterday. So they very well might have some knowledge that maybe they weren't supposed to share, or they are just speculating in there. I'm trying not to read into it. So
well, I will say,
yeah.
I remember last year when Mackenzie Holmes got injured, the way that myself and the other reporters found out her timetable was from an ESPN broadcast.
Okay.
Where they said, so you never know. I'll throw that one out there, because I was talking about that the other day. And like, maybe they know something that we just haven't been told yet.
And I was just going to say that for both of you, that Coach Morin can be pretty secretive about injuries. I mean, for some reason, she's pretty secretive. That's her prerogative. I have no problem with that. Every coach can handle it the way they want to. But either they tell the ESPN's crew that's there because they are willing to tell them something, because that probably is closer than, in my opinion, that means she's closer to being ready than farther away.
Yeah.
And secondly, I think they feel sometimes that with the national broadcast, they've got to give them a little more sometimes than they give to the local people. No offense to Amanda or Ari and the others who are there on a daily basis. I'm not saying I totally agree with that, but I'm just saying I think sometimes that's it. But they had to get that 4 to 6 weeks from somebody, because that's the first time I've heard anybody around the program, announcer, media person, actually say 4 to 6 weeks. That was what the timetable had been on an injury, which, though, Amanda, I don't know if you've been able to catch some of our shows as well in the past, but we kind of discussed a little bit that one of the things that I thought that her injury was very, after it happened, and then after AZ Fudd got hurt with Connecticut, and they said she was 3 to 6 weeks. I thought those injuries, when they happened, looked very similar. And so that's when I kind of started wondering about a 6-week timetable. So, but, that's just, those are my opinion and things like that. So, but that's it. So, but hey, we're going to go inside the numbers here and talk about those things today in a day when the numbers were not always pretty. But Amanda, we've already thrown some out, but do you have any team stats a team stat that you'd like to point out?
I think one thing that I noticed, especially coming off of the Michigan State game, was the turnovers. And Indiana finished with 13 and Nebraska finished with 21. And Indiana was able to get 26 points off of those turnovers, which is a really big step up from the last game. If, just bottom line, that Indiana was more around kind of their season average in terms of turnovers. And I think that is a good thing in a game, obviously, where not a lot of things kind of went as people might have expected. That's a good thing to see. First of all, that they can bounce back after a game where they struggled so much with turnovers, and that it really was probably more so just a one-off against Michigan State and not something that is necessarily uber concerning going forward for the rest of the season.
Kathy, a team stat?
Yeah, I definitely, turnovers and points off of them is one we were watching very carefully right after that Michigan State's game. So for me, though, of course, I think the other just big glaring on the negative side is the 3-point shooting, right? At halftime, we were I don't have the numbers in terms of shots, but we were shooting 11% from 3 and ended up at only 25%. And Amanda, you touched on it earlier, right? The thing with that, though, on the positive side, even though those shots just were not going down, especially Sydney Parrish, she didn't quit putting them up. Like, she had the confidence to keep doing it, and she ended up with 3 of 9. So not great, but those 2 that she shot in particular, or made in particular, were very timely in that overtime. But on the negative side, and we've talked about this in the last podcast after Michigan State, is how Sarah Scalia has really just seemed to lost her confidence. She didn't take a single 3 today. And part of that, I know Nebraska was really, all over her in terms of their defense, but we have to find a way to get Sarah going again and getting some shots up. And you know what, if she goes similar to Sydney and goes 3 for 9 or 1 for 5 or whatever it is, I'm okay with that, as long as we get her going again, because that's really the main reason we brought her in today. So glad to see the team stuck with it in the overtime again, especially Sydney, but I'm hoping this doesn't become a trend that we see on 3-point shooting.
Yeah, and I'll kind of go into another shooting number for us that more positive, 24 of 30 at the free throw line. We went to the line 21 more times than Nebraska did. We were plus 19 on free throws. Back to kind of the old famous Bob Knight stat. We made more free throws than Nebraska shot by far. And Nebraska was 5 for 9. As I said, we were 24 of 30. So again, that's a stat that, when you look at that, if I'm doing my math right, 80%, and I'll take that as a coach every day if we can get 80% at the free throw line, because and again, I don't plan on getting there 30 times, but when you can get there and make 80%, you're going to give yourself a chance in a game where you haven't played well. So
yeah, and they shot a lot of them too. Great volume too for them, and knocked them down very timely. Yeah, that definitely was a good game winning for us.
So let's kind of go back around the horn. If you got another one, Amanda, is there another team stat that stood out to you?
There was on the other end with Nebraska with the 21 personal fouls, because that's going off of what you just talked about with the free throws, the way that Indiana was able to get those fouls, and right from the get-go, especially with Alexis Markowski and with her going up Mackenzie Holmes, and with the whole clash underneath the post with those two, I think that had a really big impact, because they ended up sitting Markowski for a while. And just the way that they were able to impact the game with drawing those fouls from Nebraska was very impressive to me.
Kathy, anything else?
Just real quick, a touch on the rebounding. I thought this was going to be pretty important coming in. We ended up tying them in rebounding 38-38. But moreover, I think bench points is something, again, was kind of lopsided. We ended up with only 6 bench points to their 19. Now, to be fair, 10 of those 19 for them were from Hybe. And, she wasn't even expected to play at all this season. And coming into this game, she had only played in 3 games for about averaging 5 or 6 minutes. She ended up playing 25 minutes for them and really contributing technically off their bench with, 10 points and 4 assists, 5 rebounds. So I think that really made a huge difference for Nebraska. And Jeff, you and I talked about that, right? Is something to watch for Nebraska as they progress through the season here is how much she gets involved. Does she get back into the starting lineup? And, it looks to me she's definitely working her way back into that really a lot more quickly than I think anybody probably expected her.
She seemed a lot more fluid and mobile than I thought she would.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
Based on her injury and based what we kind of were thinking we might see. So, but Nebraska's solid. I mean, they're going to give people fits. The problem I think they have is that Nebraska may have is they're going to go out and beat a good Maryland team on the road, but then they're also, like we saw, capable of losing to Michigan at home.
Yeah.
So you sometimes inconsistency is still probably an issue for them, but we're not here to discuss Nebraska's issues more than we are ours. So
no, let's leave them.
Let's go back around here. And I didn't really have another team stats. You guys really took the ones I would have taken as well. So let's talk about individuals. Kathy, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Amanda.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is necessarily just honing in on individuals per se, but, we will talk, I'm sure, about Mackenzie and some of the upcoming segments more. So I'll let her kind of marinate there for us for a little bit. But in terms of just in general, I think we need to get her some points from other players. For the longest time, almost 4 minutes left in the regulation, she was the only player for us in double digits. We had Sydney was getting really close at 9 and Chloe Moore-McNeil with 8. And we did end up with 4 players in general with double digits between Garzone, Sydney, and Chloe Moore-McNeil. But we have to get Mackenzie some more help offensively. We can't, and we saw this in Michigan State. We can't have her being expected to go out and score, 20, 25, 30 something points a game. It's just not a realistic thing that we can maintain and continue winning games. It worked today, but we got a way to get people more offensively productive going forward earlier in the games.
Amanda?
I mean, yeah, you're totally right with that. And I'll go back to what we talked about with Sarah Scalia and just the volume. She's not able to produce at the volume that she was last year. And for whatever reason, whether it's a loss of confidence or they're running different plays. And so that's not what she's being tasked with. I'm a little surprised that we haven't seen more of that with getting her the opportunity to shoot the ball in the last 2 games, especially once we get into Big Ten play. But I just don't see how you can I'm sure they're not okay with her finishing with 6 points because you wouldn't, but I don't know how you wouldn't necessarily change something in the game to have her be able to provide more of that for Mackenzie Holmes and for Sydney Parrish so they don't have to keep going in these high volume, 20 plus points when you have everybody is capable on the team of scoring a lot of points. And I think Sarah Scalia is just one that they need to figure out how to get her to be able to do that.
Yeah, I would kind of agree that they may need to run at least a handful of specific plays to try and see if they can get her going early in the game, especially. I think Scalia is one of those that it really is. If she sees her first shot or two go in, her confidence really kind of swells, and then it kind of rolls from there. But the flip side of that is you miss your first couple, then you kind of start getting a little creep of self-doubt, and then all of a sudden you start thinking the basket looks a little smaller. I'm going to point out here Chloe Moore-McNeil, and I will say in our group chat that I was one at least through about the first half plus third quarter. So I was not very pleased with the way Chloe was playing because she wasn't doing much. She had like 4 points. I think they all 4 came off of free throws, and she didn't have an assist at that, or maybe 1 assist at that point, and really wasn't doing. But from that point on, then she really kind of picked up her game. She finished up with 13 points. She was 7 of 8 at the free throw line, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, 5 steals. And so I really thought Chloe played, especially down the stretch. And then again, in the overtime, I thought Chloe's play was really crucial. But again, it was one of those where I was kind of ejected. I was kind of like, Chloe, I need more of you. And then at the end, I was like, that's what I was looking for. So anyway, Kath, let's go back around the horn here. What about, you got anything else you want to talk about the individuals?
No, I don't think so, Jeff. I think we covered most of it, at least that we'll want to cover in this segment. Other than, I do want to talk a little bit more about Sydney. She just, again, came alive there for us at the end and ended up with some nice numbers, 16 points and 7 rebounds. So the only other, I guess maybe I lied. The only other thing is, while our turnovers as a team were down to 13, I thought Garzon again had some just very untimely turnovers again and led the team with 4 again. So I'm still watching her on that because we've talked about her basketball IQ and how high we think it is. I'm still hoping that will get turned around here sooner than later, the same way her fouling had earlier in the year. So that's probably it for me on the individual side.
Amanda, anything else?
Yeah, I don't think so. It's just another individual and also a team thing of just the whole coming alive at the very end. And when you really need it, I would much rather see that spread across the entire game. And so we're not sitting there worrying about Chloe Moore McNeil or Sydney Parrish or any of them besides Mackenzie Holmes really figuring out what they're doing. I would much rather see that starting rather than finishing.
All right. So we'll finish this segment up and we'll play on into game balls and Hoosier Hustle Awards.
All right. We're going to play a little music from Bob while we transition here as well.
All right, so we're going to start off with our game balls today, and we'll go around the horn here, and I believe Kathy is going to pull up, for those of you watching on the YouTube feed, you can see our running total at the bottom of the screen. Mackenzie Holmes leads the way with 8. Sydney Parrish has 2. Yarden Garzon has 2, and Grace Berger with 1. And so, Amanda, we'll go around the horn. We'll start with you. Who did you have for your game ball today?
I mean, it's going to sound like a broken record, but I feel like it has to be Mackenzie Holmes because I don't see how they win this game without her doing what she did today. And that's kind of just the bottom line. She was so consistent. She finished with a double-double, 22 points and 10 rebounds. And so, you could stop there, but she just did exactly what she needed to do and exactly what she is known for doing. And that is just kind of be the team and support the team and do whatever the team needs.
Kathy?
Yeah, we'll make a second here. And Mackenzie Holmes was, I think I probably wrote her name down, I don't know, about halfway through the first quarter. I'm not sure, but you could just see Mackenzie came out. She was the one player I thought came out ready to play from the tip. And, she already mentioned, Amanda mentioned that she already got another double-double, I believe her 5th now on the year. She also had 3 assists and 5 blocks, so and a steal, right? So, I mean, she was doing on both ends of the court, and you could just really tell, too, that fire and enthusiasm came from her from the beginning and really came alive in overtime. So, to me, it was a pretty easy decision on game ball.
Well, you guys, we're going to make it unanimous. Mackenzie Holmes is the game ball for the Nebraska game here in this 74-62 overtime win. I'm not going to go into any of her stats. You guys took them all from me, so we'll stick with the guys. I was hoping nobody would mention the block shots, but Kathy found that to get it in. So all right, so let's go back around the other way this time. Kathy, we'll have you go first. Who's your Hoosier Hustle Award? And again, we can see the awards down here at the bottom so far. Chloe Moore McNeil leads the way so far with 3.5 game balls. Sydney Parrish with 3. Oh, they're tied. Excuse me. Sydney Parrish with 3.5 as well. Grace Berger, Caitlin Peterson, Alyssa Geary, Lily Meister, and Lexi Bargesser all have, and Yarden Garzon all have 1 apiece. So those are our game balls. But Kathy, who's your hustle? Who gets your hustle award today?
Yeah, because I just thought she had some important minutes. I'm going to go with Lexi Bargesser here today again. I thought, again, if you just read her stat line and go, ho-hum, 4 points, 1 field goal out of 4. But she was solid, right? I mean, she came in, she had 4 rebounds as well, and an assist. And, there's some things there was a little bounce pass she tried to make down to Mackenzie that luckily got kicked by Nebraska that would have given her a turnover, but she didn't have any turnovers and she had some close calls. And that's great learning. But boy, I thought she just had great hustle for us. Again, with Sarah kind of struggling today, we mentioned it was just not Garzon's day. And she came in and had great minutes. I thought 23 minutes off the bench. So for me, I'm voting for Lexi for my Hoosier Hustle Award.
Amanda?
I think I'm going to agree with you on this one just because of the way that she was able to come off the bench, especially as a freshman, is really so hard to kind of talk about in a way because it just means so much for her to be able to do that as sort of like that 6th person now that you have Sydney Parrish in the starting lineup. And like we've talked about, the stat line doesn't do her justice, especially today, in the way that she was able to handle the ball on both ends of the floor and just kind of be present in almost every play that Indiana was running. Is just so important in a game where she needed to step up. I think she did, and she did it fully with no hesitation.
Yeah, and so it's 2 out of 3 is going to beat me. I was going to go with Sydney Parrish. I agree about what Lexi Bargesser did, but I just thought that without Sydney's, and maybe it's not quite the true hustle role here, but somehow we got to talk about Sydney's 16 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals. And so I was going to go with Sydney Parrish for my hustle award, but the 2 out of 3 is enough. That's going to give Lexi Bargesser her second hustle award on the season. So congratulations to Lexi. And also, I will say this, Kathy, you mentioned Amanda as well, 23 minutes. I believe that's a season high for her, and she didn't have a turnover. And I thought that to me was one of the big things watching the game. I thought they settled down a little bit more when they had, and again, I know she's a freshman, but she's more of a natural point guard than any of the others really are. Chloe's doing a great job. She has been since Grace went down. But Sarah's not really a point guard. Sydney's not truly a point guard, whereas Lexi's a point guard. And I thought that really helped them with the turnover battle today in terms of, unlike what they did up at Michigan State, where they just seemed to be throwing it left and right to out of bounds to the other team, whatever. So I thought that was, again, doesn't show up in the stat line, but I think that's where they really kind of felt a calmness out there and were able to break down some of that 3-quarter court pressure that they saw, again, from Michigan State on Thursday. We saw it again today from Nebraska. So we're going to move on here into lingering questions. And one of those that we had from the workaholics here, John had it. What could we do to improve 3-point shooting? And Amanda, we'll let you take that one first.
Oh, man.
That's not very nice to our guest, Jeff.
Shoot a lot in practice. I don't know.
Yeah.
No, I think a lot of it for them right now, and this goes back to what we've talked about with Sarah, is just confidence. And we saw how Sydney Parrish was confident in her shot because she kept shooting, but no one else was. And so I think it comes down to just doing the reps in practice and then figuring out somehow, and this is a coaching thing to figure out at that point, just how to convince the players that they are capable of doing it in a game, because we saw in the beginning of the season that they can. The non-conference schedule, we saw that they can all make their 3-pointers. They just need to start doing it again.
Yeah.
Kathy, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, Sarah clearly needs that confidence back. She didn't even attempt a 3 today, and you're not going to start making them again if you don't attempt any. And that's probably my lingering question really is with Sarah, is how long will she be kind of in this trough right now that she's going through? And, how can she pull herself out of it? Because we talked a little bit about that. The coaches can help, right? I mean, but they can only do so much. And right now it's got to be with Sarah, and she's going to have to figure out what Sarah needs to get herself playing again. And to me, that's probably the biggest, factor that will go into our 3-point shooting as well. I think it'll come around. I'm not too concerned about Chloe. I'm not concerned about Sydney. I am pretty concerned about Sarah at this point.
Yeah, the only thing I would say here is I think there are times when we're running our offense that we sometimes, if you watch closely, it's almost like we get on our own way at times. Yeah. We'll be running some high ball screen or a little weave action, and somebody all of a sudden kind of pops into a spot where if they weren't there, that pass could be going to an open 3-point shooter. Instead, it kind of like then all of a sudden it's like, well, you've brought the defender there as well, and so you've kind of just jumbled it all up and gotten it all kind of compacted. I'd like to see us run something. They did it a couple times, and I think it was early in the fourth quarter when Sydney also hit a 3. Because she was 3 for 9. So I think it was early in the fourth quarter when she hit a 3. They ran a little bit of a set where they kind of ISO'd her and McKenzie on one side of the floor, and she fed the post. They kind of turned to help, and then Sydney repositioned into an open spot, and Mac fed her for the 3. I'd like to see a little more of that. I'd like to see a little more where we just try to maybe get Sarah Scalia a set for an open 3 look. But right now, you guys said it the best. It's all about their confidence. But the only way you build confidence is to keep shooting. Now, again, when you're 1 for 9, and I think they eventually got to like 1 for 12 at one point in the game, it's hard to keep shooting it. But there's the old adage: you're always going to miss the shots you don't take. And so shooters have to remember that they're shooters. even when they're having that crisis of confidence. So, Kathy, what are any other lingering questions that you kind of have coming out of the game or coming off these last few games?
I think that Becerra was my biggest one. The only other one, again, just to continue to watching turnovers, we saw it jump at us at Bowling Green. We saw it at Michigan State. I just want to make sure that, it doesn't become a trend where we're every other game now we have these high turnovers. They looked really good today outside of, a few I thought from Garzon. So that's not a huge concern yet. I just don't want it to become some kind of pattern for the team. And I'm sure, and I know, again, thanks to our ESPN commentators going to practice yesterday, we know that Coach Morin and the coaching staff was definitely focusing on that in practice yesterday. So we know the staff and the players are super smart and they're focusing on it, but that's definitely something I want to continue watching as well.
Amanda?
Yeah, outside of the 3-point shooting and the turnovers, I would just say whether or not they're able to start games with more energy at this point, because the last 2 games they kind of came out flat, and you can't come out flat in Big Ten play. It's just not going to work for you. And we saw it today. We saw it against Michigan State playing. They're going to have to play from behind, and while that they can do that, the way the team is structured, I think they shouldn't have to. If they're able to come out strong. And so that's just something I think one of the biggest things that can impact whether or not they win or lose games from this point is the energy and the mentality coming into the game.
And also, I agree with that, Amanda. And I thought Kathy had a very good as well. But I think also I think will help them be better locked in defensively, or maybe vice versa. Being better locked in defensively will help them get a better start. And so one or the other, it's kind of the chicken or the egg. Do they need a better start to get locked in defensively, or was the defense get them a better start? I don't know, but I thought those were excellent. So those were our lingering questions we have going into the game at Northwestern. And the nice thing now, you get another day, a week off. Basically, you don't play again until next Sunday as we preview our next opponent. That game next Sunday, 3:00 Eastern, 2 Central, is on BTN or Big Ten Plus. So you'll have to have that subscription to be able to watch. IU is 40-36 all time, including 14-25 in Evanston. But IU has won the last 11 in a row with a 69-58 win last February, and Bloomington is the last matchup. And so, Kathy, I'll give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about Northwestern here.
Sure. Yeah. So as a team, Northwestern is currently 6-6 overall. They're 0-10. 0-10. My goodness, 0-2. That would be amazing. How do you go 6-6 and go to 0-10? But no, 0-2 in the Big Ten so far. They just lost Wednesday the 28th to Ohio State at home, 81-48. The interesting thing for me when I looked at Northwestern, wrong end team, Northwestern, is that 5 of their losses are to ranked teams or soon to be ranked teams, because I fully expect Duke with their win this past week to be ranked soon as well. And their 6th one was DePaul, which is not a bad team to lose to as well. So if you look at their record and say 6-6, I guess, no big deal. They're not that great of a team. Again, to your point, Amanda, you can't overlook anyone. And especially going on the road, we have to have a faster start because, their only other conference loss was to Michigan. They lost to Michigan on the road 77-66. So I don't think Northwestern's a team we should overlook at all. They're averaging right now. And again, back to, I set that up because, 5 losses to ranked teams, right? Like Oregon and Ohio State and some of these just really fantastic teams has really, I think, impacted their stats here. So as a team, they're averaging 65 points per game, and they're giving up 69 to opponents, and they're being out rebounded as well, 1.5 rebounds per game. They're only shooting 39% field goal, including 26 from 3. So at least right now, again, on paper, I'll be fully transparent. I haven't watched them. They don't look like a threat from 3-point. And they're also, though, holding their opponents, though, the 39% shooting and 29% from 3. So that will be interesting. If they're holding their opponents to 29% from 3-point, will we be able to get our 3-point groove back against their defense? Because it seems, again, on paper that maybe their 3-point defense is there. And the interesting thing is in turnovers, they're forcing 18 and committing 18 turnovers per game. So I don't know if that means that we'll have a sloppy game here on Sunday or not next Sunday, but I guess we'll see. So did you want me to go into any of the players too, Jeff, or?
Well, I'll take a couple of them here. Yeah, Yep. They have 2 players averaging double figures in Kaylee Walsh at 12.8, Sydney Wood at 10.9. Courtney Shaw leads them in rebounding at 5.5, and they only have started. Only 2 players have started all 12 games. 6 others have been in the lineup. Joe McCann has been the head coach since 2008. He is currently 247 and 204 at Northwestern, 102 and 138 in Big Ten play in his 15th year, 756 and 378 overall in his 37th year. I didn't realize he'd been around that long, but as I went back and looked at his career record, I was like, wow, 37 years as a head coach. So, Amanda, have you had a chance to look at Northwestern much or remember much about them from last year? It's a different team than last year because they graduated one of their best players.
Yeah, very different team. I will confess that I haven't had a lot of time to be looking at them. I saw the start of their game against Ohio State, and then Ohio State went on a run, and I was tired, and I went to bed. So it's, I'm on break. I got to get my sleep. Yeah. But I will say the thing about this game, I think it's misleading in a lot of ways because Indiana has a lot of time off, which could be good or bad, because when you have a week, there's a lot that can go into it on either ends. When you're looking at the overall records and even in season records, like you talked about with the 6-6 compared to Indiana's, more casual fans, I guess, or just people looking at the records would say, oh, it should be easier for Indiana, but it won't be because it's the Big Ten. And we've talked about it before, is that you can't just go by the numbers. And the expectation and the hope is that the team obviously knows not to go by the numbers and that they don't let that get into their heads. But you never know what's going to happen. And so that kind of thing, I think, will contribute to how the game is played and how it eventually ends up. But it's not an easy throwaway game by any means. And like you said, Kathy, because no Big Ten team and no Big Ten game can be at this point.
Yep. Absolutely. Well said.
I agree totally. And I think that's the mindset they got to get to a little bit. It makes me wonder a little bit about that game at Michigan State. Did they get caught a little flat-footed thinking it was going to be a little bit easier than it would be? And so I think they got to kind of get that mindset that every game they're going to get everybody's best shot. When you're ranked in the top 10, you're going to get everybody's best effort. Now, even with the loss this week, I still expect them to be in the top 10. I think they'll drop down 7 or 8 down to number 7, number 8, somewhere in there, because other teams are losing as well. And I don't think they'll hold a loss on the road at Michigan State as much against them as they would have a loss at home to Nebraska today. Yeah. So
yeah, we had that day, us and 2 other top 10 teams lost. The rankings are going to be interesting when they come out again.
Yeah. So we've been keeping you updated about Hoosier alums in the community and on the Twitter feed. You can follow us on Twitter at DTW IUDWBB, or just search for us on Twitter, Doing the Work, or check out the Assembly Call community page. We also want to be sure to have you catch and subscribe to the next episode of Crimson Cast. That's part of our Back Home Network. As Amanda mentioned earlier, she now has a podcast there where she's talking about the women's team as well. So give her a listen. AC Radio will be back on Thursday with a post-game show. The men will be back in action on Thursday at Iowa, and that will be a huge game for the men, not only as a conference game, but also to kind of maybe start getting them going back into the right direction. Our next show will be next Sunday at approximately 5 o'clock Eastern, 4 Central, as we'll be live following the Northwestern game. And so we're hoping everybody will be able to be back here and join us again for our live broadcast here on YouTube, or you can always listen to the podcast on your favorite service, whether it's Spotify or Apple, whatever that may be. Okay, it's time for last call. And Kathy, we're going to go to you first for last call. And we'll have Amanda as our guest kind of wrap us up then.
All right. No pressure, Amanda. I'll take all the great stuff and then let Jeff have it. No, I'm just kidding. For me, again, Happy New Year to everyone out there. And we got to win, right? We're starting off the 2023 on the right side of the win-loss column. And, we're keeping things rolling here, I think, as a program, and just loving to see that grittiness. We know that Nebraska is not a team to overlook. They had a little bit of a slow start, but they didn't quit on us. They didn't quit on themselves, and they battled back, and they really just came alive in that overtime. So what I'm hoping to see as we go into this game against Northwestern on the road is, can we take our defense now from that overtime, take it with us on the road? Let's go up to Evanston and get started right away. And, maybe just have a really game that we don't have to have heart attacks about. So for me, that's what I'm kind of looking for. Take that week that we have off now, really focus on, again, getting healthy, everyone staying healthy, making our defense, and traveling it up to Evanston.
Amanda, your last thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, after this game in Michigan State, there's no doubt that there are a lot of things for Indiana to work on. But that's not a bad thing, and the close games are not bad things, and they're not things to like lose your head over or get really upset about, because they're going to happen now that we're in conference play. Hopefully the Northwestern game and not every single game will make us, biting our nails on the edges of our seats until the buzzer goes. But Kathy, like you said, we continue to see how determined and how gritty this team is, and that is going to be one of the biggest difference makers come March and come postseason and tournament time, is the mentality. And it's very clear that from this game and going forward, they have that, and they have the skill, and they have all of the abilities to win and to make it. And I think this game just reinforced that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of work off of that as well. That look where this program has come under Terry Moore, and where our first loss is on December 28th of the season. We're 12-0, lose, and people were starting to kind of, I won't say losing their minds, but people were all of a sudden like, "Oh my goodness, what's wrong with the team?" And that probably included us a little bit as well,
Yeah.
But I mean, that's we were 13-1. Yes, it wasn't pretty today. It wasn't the best that they can play, but like Amanda said, like Kathy has pointed out a couple times, you just got to keep winning. You find ways to win, and you don't want to be the best team on January 1st. You want to be the best team on April the 1st, and that's where you got to kind of keep moving forward and take everything you do and learn from it, and try to get a little bit better, make your adjustments, make your tweaks, whatever you got to do. And let's face it, this is still a team, and I know, and I'm not trying to make any excuses for the loss at Michigan State or anything that's been going on, but getting Grace Berger back, even close to a healthy Grace Berger, will help. If she finally gets back, because we thought Keandra Brown will, I should say, we've been hearing kind of middle of January about Keandra Brown anyway, so we're maybe still a couple of weeks away from Keandra Brown. All of a sudden now, your depth and your rotations will look a whole lot different on the 1st of February than they did on January 1st. So that's going to be kind of my last thought, is let's just, let's just remember that it is a grind. It is a long journey, and we want to be better as we get better or get to playing into March. So, and if you want to see us do the show live and be part of the live chat, make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/assemblycall. You can also be part of our private community as well. Join for free today at join.assemblycall.com, or I should say join today. It's no longer free. Join.assemblycall.com. That's join.assembly.com. And special thanks to John Ringer of Rig Design for designing our new logo that you can see in the corner if you're watching on the YouTube feed. Also, a big thank you to Bob Thompson for our new music that you've been hearing throughout the broadcast. And thank you for listening. We'll be back to talk IU hoops again with you soon. We want to thank Amanda Foster from Crimson Cast for coming on and joining us again. Hopefully she'll be coming back again in the future, as we enjoy having her. And until then, keep your elbow in, your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers.
All right. Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year, everybody.